different things that are happening in the community and hear from some interesting people on different topics. And tonight we have Dr. James Leslie, and he is an archaeologist, and he is going to, as you probably all saw online, chat to us, explain more about what it is. But he'll be talking for about an hour, so we can have questions and stuff, and then we'll open up the floor. We've got some events happening over here I'll tell you about, and other people might have things going on they want to share for the last half hour, but that's pretty much how it will go. So I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Doctor.
Alright.
Mihi ana te karangi, mihi ana te papa. Ki te whare e tu nei, e nā koe. Ki te whānau e hui hui nei, e nā koe. Thank you for having me here. I was at the New Zealand Tree Croppers annual conference, and it led to a whole bunch of little talks that have been spinning off from it. And so while this talk is probably quite similar to that, it's we've sort of grown it a little bit, and I've tried to sort of make this relevant to the kaupapa of what we're dealing with, which in terms of is eco solutions. And of course, when you're dealing with archaeology, you're looking at people coming up with solutions. And as I was saying earlier, the thing about people is that they have the ability to stuff things up as well as to make things better. And it's this cultural aspect where you look at something which might be a problem and work out how to make it into an opportunity. And that's something which is a very human aspect. So, and of course, when I do whakapapa, it sort of goes back quite a way, because I'm an archaeologist, so I'm dealing with connections going a long way back. But this particular tool, we're looking at food, and we're looking at how people have used it, and how New Zealand has this unique particular sort of archaeology due to its isolation, due to its difficulty of getting here. And then when people got here, for a long period of time, they didn't have any other inputs. And so they had to do things internally as much as they could. And this leaves a signature in the archaeology or the physical remains, which we can talk about and see to this day. So, right. So, we're talking about Māori gardening systems because you're sitting in one of the biggest gardens in the country. I lived in Whangarei for 15 years, and it grows everything. You know, it's slime and mold and slugs and snails, and you get 2 crops out of everything. And between these hills, you have this microclimate on this beautiful, fertile soils. And so it's actually a place of great value. And the thing about gardens is that Polynesian society, Māori society, is fundamentally based around gardening. These are small-scale gardeners, hunter-gatherers, but mostly farmers in a small scale. We call them horticulturalists because they're multiple crops. It's one of those things that if you're, you can't really afford to monocrop, because if things go wrong, they go badly wrong. It's only when you have a society big enough where you can monocrop, and you can monocrop, and you can monocrop, that you can cross-pollinate. So we're going to talk about whakato ki kākano. So in many ways, you can actually see the impact of humanity on New Zealand. So this is a recreated picture of deforestation from pre-human times to during the European and Māori period, or the period of Polynesian settlement, where they were in a process of becoming Māori and the process of becoming differentiated from their tupu, and then with Europeans. And so you can see how the deforestation has occurred, because when those first arrivals came to New Zealand, it's primeval forest, literally down to the water's edge. It's like that sort of national park at the top of the South Island. If you ever go there, it's amazingly beautiful and wild and spooky. But if you want to eat, you've got to clear it. You've got to clear certain lands for certain crops. So here we are. This is sort of a time frame for this human settlement of the world. And as you can see, the sort of out of Africa model. This is, by the way, only the Homo sapiens sapien we're talking about, not getting into Neanderthals or Homo erectus or Homo habilis or any of those early groups which often walked out. And as you can see from this area here, these are the 1,000-year dates, and how people walked out through here, and of course up here, of course across the Aleutians into North America around about 25,000 years ago. And of course when they got to places like China and Europe, they already met Homo erectus that were living there, which were basically Neanderthals in a variety of forms, for 1.5 million years. So, but then when they get to the sea, things slow down. Getting across water barriers is pretty big. And of course, this is one of the biggest water barriers. Here is Ireland, Southeast Asia. And of course, during various ice ages, the sea levels go up and down. So you literally can walk as far as Borneo and these places here, but you can't get across this gap, which is the Wallacea Gap. And we know it's a gap because you've got marsupials on this side, and you've got mammals, elephants and tigers on the other. There's a real boundary there. It's very deep water, it never dries out, you have to. But we know people got across because down in Victoria, there was a burial site at Lake Mungo where people were 39,000 years old. So it's got to be more than 39,000 years. You know, and it's Victoria, it's a hell of a long way from where you came from across here. And various other archaeological sites. So we know that getting across there happens somewhere between 50 to 70,000 years maybe. But unlike the Pacific, where things were relatively recent, that's a long time ago. And having any cultural knowledge transmitted is really difficult. But the knowledge that we got across here led to this here, rewriting this. Because if you've ever seen that crab fishing show in the Aleutian Islands, this dreadful sea that you have to get across. And everyone said, oh, you have to wait till the ice is really big on the mainland so that these islands form a land bridge. So you walk across and then you sit around for about 1,000 years waiting for the ice to melt, because it's a, you know, and then you walk south. So which means that you'd, you know, that would mean you'd get down to here at about 14,000 years ago. And we find sites down here at 14,000 years old. So going, that's going pretty fast. Bicycles, how do you get down there so fast? But when your Pacific archaeologists say, hey, people got across this gap, which is about 100 kilometres with dotted with islands. They did it at 65,000 years ago. Then you don't have to wait for the ice to form a land bridge. That's just a bunch of archaeologists who've never been on the water saying these things. And so you can island hop. And then when you get to the mainland, you don't have to wait for the 1 kilometre thick ice field to melt. You can just bounce down the coastal edge, or the marine effect keeps the place full of ice free, and of course jam-packed full of animals and stuff. So people were here probably a lot earlier than we thought. But I'm not interested in that, I want to talk about this. And so here we come into Ireland, Southeast Asia, up into this place around here. People were in this area of the Bismarcks and the Admiralties and stuff at least 30,000 years ago, playing around, using boats and things like that. Now, centres of domestication, this is all about the use of plants in ways that are more than just hunter and gathering. Okay? So, and what's really kind of interesting is that around in the Holocene period, it occurred in all these different places at the same time. All the ecological factors all came together to end up with the whole world having lots of food. You just go to the supermarket and everything you eat comes from all over the world. You know, you really don't want to go back to sort of what English people were eating in the 1400s. It's really quite sad. So these are the ones that I'm particularly interested in the sort of Southeast Asia and in the area around Papua New Guinea and Australia, which of course were all joined up. And use these boats, these waka-holder, double-hulled canoes. Sometimes you have outriggers instead of double hulls, but they're a highly efficient way of getting around. Like all catamarans, they're fast. When Cook got to New Zealand, he saw most of the waka in New Zealand were single-hull coastal boats, except for the bottom of the South Island. To get into Fiordland, you had to go out to the sea. And the only way to get out to sea was to have a seaworthy boat, and that means a double-hull boat. But they didn't need the navigation. All that knowledge about navigation changed and got changed to other things. So here we have the famous migration routes into the Pacific. So here's the Bismarcks and Solomons, and one of many groups of people. One, we don't know their name, but we call them the Lapita people, after a village in New Caledonia, where we finally came to terms with the pottery that they make. Particular type of dentate stamped pottery, very distinctive. Archaeologists love pottery. It means you can see how designs and types of pottery can turn up in different places. And before we had carbon dating and stuff, it was all about seriation of pots and stuff. So finding pots in the Pacific got them very excited, as you can imagine. Archaeologists are a little strange, to say the least. And to get out of this group here, they needed to get across 150 kilometres of water. Now, that's, Whangarei to Auckland. It's not particularly far. But I've sailed to Great Barrier from Bay of Islands. It's a long way. And to do it with a viable population and all the things you need to make a successful colonisation is really tough. But they did it, and they got across, and they got into what we call Western Pacific, Western Polynesia. So you have Fiji, Samoa, Tonga, Vanuatu, New Caledonia. And they all have this distinctive dentate stamp pottery, and we can trace them from the carbon dates coming through here. And then around about, and they got this far, and then they stopped because to get across to the next step required 400 kilometres of water to be traversed, which required better boats. It required better navigation technology, but it also required, to really want to do it. And what they were looking for was empty lands. And if you can make your name, find an empty place, you're famous. And they got across there around about 1,000 years ago into what we call Hawaii, or Eastern Pacific. And if you look on Google Earth, you literally can't see it. The islands are so small, because they've been getting smaller and smaller as you get across. But these here, this is sort of the heartland. And from this area here, within 200 years, they had done the final push. Sort of 2,400 kilometres down to Aotearoa, 3,000 kilometres out to Easter Island, and 4,000 kilometres up to Hawaii. So you can see how to progressive learning technology, where you see the islands, so the islands are over the horizon, to the islands are further over the horizon. So we find no evidence of Polynesians in North and South America, but then North and South America are full of people. There are traditions in Chile. The Chilean ambassador spoke to my boss Bill nearly 20 years ago talking about traditions of people coming over the sea and then giving them food and going back. But the thing about North and South America is full of people. There are sewn waka, planked waka, up in North America, which appear at roughly the same time as Polynesians are getting there.
What was that word?
Sewn. So basically you have your dugout piece of wood, but then you put an extra piece of wood on the top and you sew it together.
S-E-W-N. Thank you.
That's right. But we know they did get to South America because the one crop they had that wasn't Southeast Asian was the kumara. And kumara is a potato. And we know they got there because we've excavated kumara in the Society Islands, dated to 1200 AD. That's not particularly early, but it's long before the Portuguese or the Spanish were in the Pacific. If it had been 1500 AD, the arguments would have been, well, these crops sort of permeated back into Europe and then they permeated back into the Pacific, because this is quite a permeable boundary. But it's too early. Your options are either the South Americans brought it or the Polynesians took it. And unfortunately for the South Americans, their learning curve was that, to find one island, and then that to find everything else. So they didn't have the opportunity to learn navigation or see the opportunities. And this is the thing about ecological issues. There's the ability of humans to turn a problem into an opportunity. As we say, we have this ability to completely stuff everything up, but also to fix things at the same time. So what are the plants that sort of came to New Zealand? This is the sort of primary things we're talking about, the animal crops, root crops, pulses, grains, and where they came from. Mesoamerica, the Near East, North China, Southeast Asia. And these are the ones that sort of ended up here. So it's sort of a filtering type scenario. But what we got in New Zealand was the sweet potato, the yam, the potato, the dog. We didn't have the chicken, by the way, and we didn't have the pig, but we did have the rat. which was the Pouhere, the Polynesian rat, which was what we call a common soul. It was brought as a delicacy. When you don't have much in the way of meat, things like rats are quite good, especially when you give them all good food. So in the Pacific, if you go even into, say, the Hawaii, Cook Islands, the Māori, they grow taro there in these amazing rice paddy systems, irrigated, reticulated watering systems, and they produce a vast amount of taro. They have kumara, but they don't eat it. They just feed it to the pigs to make the pigs taste good. But there are certain things about the taro, which is a high carb plant, that has problems when you get to New Zealand. But all of those crops came to New Zealand.
Excuse me,
Maybe not.
with Musa species, with banana, there's nothing in the fossil record so far, is there, that we found to show that bananas were here, or am I out of date?
So we have no evidence that they were successfully here.
No, I believe they came though because of the linguistic record.
So there's a lot of questions. If you're looking for some physical evidence of them, we can't find them. But then bananas are quite difficult to find physical evidence.
Yeah,
Tubers, by their very nature, don't leave much behind. You will one day be able to get DNA tests to see if somebody grew tubers in the ground. But we don't know. But all we can tell you is that at the time of the first European contact, we have a variety of crops that were often disappeared very quickly, but no bananas, no breadfruit, no coconut. Coconut is this amazing plant in the Pacific. You know, not only can you eat it and drink it, but you can make things out of it. And so, you know, New Zealand doesn't have the coconut. It's a bit too cold to grow. But we have the nikau, which one translation is the no-nut tree. I sort of had this vision of, this sort of very Western vision of sort of teenagers on board the Waka going, are we there yet? It doesn't be great, you know, you'll have great fun, it's a new place. It's getting cold. Yeah, but where's the coconut? Look, there's one. I can't see any nuts on it. Oh, just wait till the season, it'll grow. No, didn't grow. So, but when the Europeans arrived, they talk about some of these aspects of gardens all throughout the coastal regions of New Zealand. Cook and Joseph Banks, the leading scientist of the day, described gardens on the east coast. There are plenty of Mercury Bay and the Bed of Islands. But no gardens in Queen Charlotte Sound, so not deep south. What they were finding was New Zealand was a uniquely different place from what they'd been expecting. For the 2,500 years they've been moving from big islands close together to small islands further and further apart. And suddenly they get to New Zealand, which is 10 times larger than all those islands put together. But it has climate. At best, it's subtropical. At worst, it's subarctic. And we know the early explorers got this far because we find their sites as far south as the subantarctic islands, which if you don't go there without a survival suit, you won't die, which is pretty cold for people who are used to the tropics. So they were very good at exploring. And they talk about how they grew things and the designs of the gardens, this quincunx pattern, and things like that. So there's a lot of documentation about gardening. Gardening is really important. When you've got gardening, especially in a place like Whangarei, it's very popular. So what are the crops that were introduced to New Zealand? Well, you've got your taro, which is the dominant crop in the Pacific. You've got your kumara, you've got your yams, different varieties of yams in the Pacific, but those are the little ones that got to New Zealand. You've got your, this is your Pouhere, which is what they call the cabbage tree, Pacific cabbage tree, but it's not a cabbage tree, but you can eat the head of it. And then there's the New Zealand version, fruticosa, which is, you can do that, but you can also take the tap root and you can cook it in an earth oven and it goes 25% fruit, basically caramelizes into sugar. So especially in the deep south, if you're going to grow stuff, these things were quite important. And there's of course the bottle gourd, one of the most widely dispersed plants. It came both through South America from the Siberia, that line, it also came through Southeast Asia. So we're not sure of the bottle gourd in New Zealand being whether it's a Southeast Asian or a South American version, because all of those traditional bottle gourds have hybridized now. So if we look at they're always hybridized. So the question is, were they hybridized after European arrival, or were they hybridized at when the Polynesians arrived and became the Hikoi becoming Māori? Or, so if you can excavate one that's dated to before Europeans arrived, and it goes, well, this one is a South American variety, then you can say, yes, we can add that to the kumara to come to New Zealand. If it's bottle gourds, yes. But if it's Southeast Asian, you can say, oh, well, it came with the other crops, the taros and stuff. But if it's hybridized 400 years ago, then it's both came. And this is what we call the presence and absence scenarios. There's your explanations. You just need to find something that's confirmed that date. And we do have some. We haven't been and DNA yet. So these are important crops, and everyone tends to know about these crops. We have a national database of archaeological sites. There's 75,000 sites recorded in New Zealand so far. But what's quite interesting is the distribution. And as you can see, the distribution has a northern bias. And it's to do, and you can see it here, this is the distribution of where you can grow crops, Polynesian crops. And there's a clear correlation between the two. So these are the kumara growing areas. You see up in the far north here, and down on the east coast, you don't see much stuff happening here, but this is the zone where the heartland, this is the cradle for a lot of crops that are found around New Zealand. And we have different types of gardens. You've got modified soils, not quite sure why it's doing that. You've got slope trenches, you've got ditches, you've got stone structures, especially around here. Especially on the volcanic silts, you find a lot of this litter of stones, and so people use these in different ways. So that makes them quite easy to see. But kumara became very quickly the dominant crop because, unlike taro, it's got a 5-month growing season, while taro has a 10-month growing season. And so if you only had taro, all your sites would be up here. Okay. That distribution that I showed you before wouldn't be like that, it would be like that. But the flip side to that is if the tupuna brought back the white potato as long as kumara, the distribution of sites would be right through the bottom of the South Island. Because when white potato came, within 3 years, it was growing all the way around the bottom of the South Island as a major trade good. Because people didn't like the taste of it particularly much, but it was a great trade good. So there's your quincunx patterns, creating these little bouquets where you grow your kumara. Got to have a hard pan underneath it to make the tubers bulk out with carbohydrates. If you don't, if you've got a kerikeri soil where it's got 2 meters of going straight down, beautiful soil, the roots just keep going down and never bulk out, so it's no good. So you either use a hard pan like around Whangarei in the Portland area with the limestone soils, very thin soils, beautiful for kumara. There's ginormous parasites and kumara pits all through there. Or you make it by putting stones at the bottom, or some other material which we find. But in the Pacific, you can leave your kumara growing in the soil all year round because there's no climate, it's just tropical. But in New Zealand, we have climate. And so we have to store the kumara. And as everyone knows, when you stick the kumara in a paper bag under your sink, there's a chance that it's going to turn to mush pretty easily. It doesn't like moisture. And so what was created was what we call the kumara pits, which are actually a climate control system to keep moisture away. So if you look at this cut out scenario of what a kumara pit actually would have looked like with a structure on it, and these top down views, you can see here, there's your kumara pit as a slice of life. This one's got a central pole, this has got a double pole. This is looking down, you can see the postal. This is the sort of thing that I excavate when you find a kumara pit. And then there'll often be a drain running around it. They're trying to get the moisture out. So when you talked about kumara being up on the ridges, it's up there for a variety of reasons, but one of the very important ones is that if it's on a nice narrow ridge, you can put sumps or even drains to keep the moisture out. So this is so inside this structure there will be racks, and on the racks there will be kites, And they might even have bracken fern, they might have sand, anything to draw that moisture away. But even with the best will in the world, these things don't last forever, and you will find that they will get blights and moulds will come in. And so what you'll see on a ridge, there might be a whole sequence of kumara pits, but only the last 3 are open. The others were used over time. And then as they get to the point, they burn them, and then they excavate the next pit and bury all that mould under the thing, so you get this sequence going along. It's one of the issues with archaeology. We're good at landscape. So there's a past site, there's kumara pits, there's kumara pits, but I can't necessarily tell you much about time unless I've got carbon dates. While history is really good at time. So-and-so begat so-and-so. But it's not very good at place. It has to use names. If you don't know the names, you're a bit stuffed. But when you can mesh them together, you can tell some quite interesting stories. So there's your Rua Kumara. We also get these little holes in the side of hills and things like that. There's a variety of those. And we have them all in the north. So I'm giving, this is a, what the hell is that? Okay. It's
And if
gone.
you want, sorry.
It's gone. Is that you? Is
If
that
you-
me touching? Ah!
Sorry, I'll just, we can't give it,
Thank you.
I don't know. If it does it too much,
Okay.
that erases.
So I thought give you some examples of gardening system. Thought it was me. That's right. So Taimata Bay, if you know Monganui, you look east from the famous fish and chip shop to the lovely shield-shaped mountain called Whakangi. And on the other side there's a series of bays, Taimaru Bay, Waimahana, Tupou, Taupo, get into the Whangaroa. And quite interesting from a whakapapa point of view from the Ngāti Kahu ki Whaingaroa people. Kupe came into Taipa, but the first marae was at Taimaru Bay. And then the sons of that built the next marae at Waimahana. And you get this budding off all the way around into the Whangaroa in terms of traditional marae. And that's one of the ways of colonisation. Because it's an aside, but if you do colonise somewhere and you arrive with a certain number of people, you're very exposed to emergencies and disasters. And you have to get your population up very fast. And you have to tie yourself together to the others, because not only do you need them for emergencies in case something goes wrong, just like you did on the Waka coming over, but you haven't got enough people for marriages. It's only later, when the population is much higher. And now all those other people are eating your fish and wanting your gardens and stuff, and that's when you get conflict and things like that happening, and things start to change. So let's have a look at Taimaru Bay. Sandra Heihe, who I worked with back in the 90s. There's a lovely little bay, and all of these headlands have got past sites on them, because if you have gardens, you need to protect them, because people want them. Tawhirirahi, the poor knights. So earlier about 15 years ago, I was working with Ngātiwai and going out to Tawhirirahi on the poor knights, where there's a whole lot of stone structures. And these are a variety of things. You get these stone walls, you get stone facings, you get these heaps and bordered stone heaps and stone mounds and various other structures. Because one of the things about kumara is it doesn't like getting its feet wet, but it really likes well-drained silty soil. The other thing it's quite good at is it's hydrophytic. In other words, it can get all the moisture it needs from fog and dew. And if you've ever seen the Poor Knights and been out there, it's got these big cliffs. And although it's not big enough to be a high island with its own weather system, those cliffs create that because the wind hits them, goes straight up, and you get these clouds forming. So every day there's fog and stuff. And so it's a great place to garden. It just happens to be a bit of a shit place to live because there's no water. So there you can see one of these stone rows, beautifully preserved. And big stones on the outside, little stones in the middle. And they were using things, as all good market gardeners do. Everything you do has multiple purposes. You clear the land to garden between your mounds, but you also use these rows to maybe have fences to act as a windbreak. There are also social boundaries between different families who have different rights to do things. So here's a picture of Tawhirirahi, the northern island of the Poor Knights, or the Tawhirirahi group. These different colours relate to brown as villages, green as gardens, silver as specialist sites like stoneworking to making tools, and the red is burial sites. So let's have a look at this garden here. Now, here's the stream running through it. You sort of, like the Mexican gardening systems, we talk about garden valleys because it sounds really cool. This is more of a garden gully, it's not very big. But here's your stream running through it, here's your contour lines showing a gentle slope from high to low. And then these are the artifacts, which is about just accidental dropping of occasional bit of obsidian. So let's see what we put in now. We put in those stone rows. And if you see here, these stone rows form boundaries. This is the last stone row. They were actually in the process of building that one when they left the island due to an attack. And then let's put other things in. There's the stone mounds for clearing the soil to garden around things. And then you've got these stone facings. What these do, if you think about a terrace, you've got a slope and you make a terrace to live on. This is not really a terrace, but it's got this little scarp at the front that just slows down the movement of water by reducing the slope. You find that at Waipo and various other places. Then we've got these scatters of stone. There's my little isolated stone row, which from the Pacific and stuff, we're pretty sure social boundaries, different whānau. What's really interesting, this was started, they only had a few metres built of it, and they'd cleared, except here, they'd cleared all the land, and there's the area of stone, untouched natural stone. And then there's your gardening terraces, and there's your village sites. So this is quite an interesting scenario. We get this all over the place. Now this is probably the most dramatic site we have around gardening, and it's all in our neck of the woods, the Bay of Islands. This is Pouhere, the Tupō, one of the volcanic cones in the inland Bay of Islands. There's 14 of them, and they create in their ash field around these little volcanoes. They are highly fertile in a sea of clay, and so they became a focal point for settlement. These are all the features on this cone that I've draped over it. And on the flanks, down on these flat land, is where all the gardens were. The garden was the powerhouse and the wealth of an area. Whangarei was one of these places. You just have to look at the Native Land Court. It was fought over endlessly. It had the misfortune to be on the boundary between Ngāti Whātua and Ngāpui in the latter years, but it was also a highly valuable place for gardening. So let's have a look at this little valley off the side of this cone. This is a map done by Leatherby and Morgan in 1984. There's that. Now these are contour lines, so that's slope going that way, and this is drain lines running through here, and these little dots are stone mounds. How many stone mounds can you see? There's over 5,000 stone mounds around this volcanic cone. The whole, there's a landscape. Here you can see the terraces sitting on the ridge top where people are living and doing various gardening things. So there are volcanic cones like this in Auckland. We have a lot up in the Bay of Islands, Puketona's ones as well. But because of the nature of the underlying mantle, which is quite fractured, you don't get your giant volcanoes, you get these pockets of these little volcanoes. And these all blew up in the last 5 to 15 million years ago. Pouhere blew up last time 2,300 years ago, so before humans arrived. So let's have a look at that, and that's what it looks like on an oblique aerial photograph. So those are garden drain systems, and you can see the mounds. They show up as lighter blocks because it's what we call a crop mark. And summer, they don't get as much moisture as everywhere else, so they turn up very visible. We like things like that. So Awanui, up in the far north. Now, Awanui is where you can grow taro. Here's taro growing on in the Southern Cooks, and it's in one of those taro beds, an irrigated taro system. Now, here at Awanui, you get wetland drain systems, and you can, again, it's a crop mark, and you can see where the drains are. Now, unlike Southeast Asia or the Cooks, where you have to rely on sort of monsoons and stuff like that, Northland, I'm sure you don't realise this, but Northland has generally not much problem with too little rain, it's generally too much rain. And so what you need to do is, you don't need irrigated system, you need flood control. And just look at all the work going on in Kaitara as we speak to fix those flood issues. These are all flood control. And each of these forms little plots. And so maybe inside the actual drain you can grow your taro, but on the soil in between you might well be able to grow kumara and yams and gourds and all these other things. So these places are really important. And huge numbers of people were living here. This is Mangahawea. It's a bay on the northwestern side of Moturua Island in the Bay of Islands. And this is a reconstructed drawing of what the village probably looked like. You can see the waka on the beach, the gardens at the back, and along this ridge here is where the houses and various other things were going on. And that's a big project we've had with Ngāti Kuta and Pakeha in that area for the last 5 years. But then you have tree crops. Now, we don't really think of Polynesians coming to New Zealand with tree crops, but where they came from, they had them. They had breadfruit, they had banana, they had these other things as well. And so, and some of them got to New Zealand, and so we had the paper mulberry came to New Zealand. Now, paper mulberry is the aute, it's your tapa cloth plant. So in the Pacific, it's hugely important. And when Cook was here in 1769, he and Joseph Banks reported seeing it in the Bay of Islands, tapa cloth being made, but literally that's the last reference we have to it. They saw the plants growing, they saw the tapa cloth made. We occasionally find tapa cloth beaters, which are different from brackenfern beaters. The other thing is Cordyline australis, which is the cabbage tree, where you can eat the sort of head of it, but also the root. And then there's the karaka, which is a New Zealand tree that was domesticated. And we've only really just realised that quite recently. So there's your outday, your paper mulberry. There's a bracken, a tapa cloth beater. If you've ever seen a fern root beater, it's round. But this is square and it's got those lines on it to try and get the fibres flat to make your tapa cloth. It's a Polynesian thing, hugely important. It got to New Zealand, it held on despite everything. Then you've got your tikalka and your tipore. So there's your famous tikalka, your cabbage tree. And there's your tipore. Now we do actually find occasional plants of this tipore in the north, and these have edible aspects to them. And what's important, as I said before, is that these can be grown places where you can't grow kumara. But then you have the karaka. Now, that's the natural distribution of karaka, north of that line.
Wow.
That's the distribution of karaka, including the Chatham Islands. It's north of Whangarei, and if you find a traditional karaka tree which has not been domesticated, the seeds are tiny. But everywhere in the north and down in New Zealand, you'll see quite large nuts. And it's important because they're a super nut. They have all of the trace elements that you need to live on. So you can live on karaka nuts if you process the toxins out of it, and fish, quite successfully, as they did on the Chatham Islands. But all throughout New Zealand, you'll find where you'll have gardens and parasites to defend the gardens, you'll find groves of karaka trees. They'll often be sheltered in little gullies and stuff. It was an extra food source. It was important, but not vitally important. But on the Chathams, where you can't grow kumara, you can't grow taro, at least not reliably, karaka became the dominant food crop. It allows you to store food over winter, which means if your food supply is like this, your carrying capacity is not there, population numbers, it's here, because you can transmit it over time. And guess what? That's where you find those famous dendroglyphs, where they're carved gods on the trees.
So you're saying that the karaka that we have everywhere is actually domesticated,
Yes.
right? Oh.
Yes. And we've only just realised it.
Okay.
Makes sense though, because I've always thought it is so large.
You know, the kukupai.
Yes.
Right? So.
But all I can tell you is that we know that the undomesticated one has a small fruit. The domesticated one through the rest of the island has a large fruit, and the domesticated one on the Chathams has even a larger fruit. So they were selected for size. And you can eat the flesh, and you can process the nut. So I put out a challenge to the tree croppers to say, hey, if you're looking for, I don't know, carbon credits, and you don't want to grow rimu and tautra because it takes too long, why don't you grow karaka? And in the process you can then make jam out of the flesh, and then you can sell the nuts as a crop. It's like, why not?
They're delicious.
How does it process them?
So,
Yeah.
Time.
okay, well,
Time and temperature.
you can.
Tell me over here so I can.
It's well established in traditions about how to do it. Okay, so and everyone says, well, how did they learn how to do it? Everything,
I think a few
It's not-
people my age
Yes.
were experimented on.
Yes, it might have been. But it's like it's like when you have that. I mean, like the Japanese blowfish, which is completely poisonous unless you cut out most of it. And so brave people eat it because they've proven their manliness by it's not dying. I suppose. Anyway, so people do things. But the thing was, they came from a culture that had tree crops. Okay, and we know that they got there very, very early to the Chathams. Whether they bounced off New Zealand to get there, they were there as early as in New Zealand. They were East Polynesian, and they had tree crops. So it was like, hey, we need to do this, because on board those first exploring waka, they had a whole bunch of specialists who were looking at the environment, trying to turn a problem into an opportunity. Exactly like Cook had all the scientists on board to try and learn all sorts of stuff. So the rest of us arrived later. So there's the Chathams. There's what people thought they used to eat, which, by the way, you can't survive on. There's the shellfish, the shell middens, huge shell middens, so they're eating a variety of kaimoana. And there's where all the karaka are growing. Okay. And they're still there to this day. And there's your carvings. Due to the history of the Chatham Islands and Ngāti Wutanga and Hapu coming in there from Taranaki, a lot of the stories about these Moriori type sites are not there. So we're trying to reconstruct it, okay, using as much with traditions as possible. So I thought, as I said to you at the beginning, Whangarei is this giant garden, and there is actually parts of it that are still surviving. And Fred Tito made this point, that this particular little 200-metre area is the story of Whangarei in stone. If you go down the Hatia Drive, just before you get to, is it the Colonial Motel on the right? Anyway, just as you come down from the Regent, and just as it levels out and you can see the water, you park on that side there, and just go and park there, and you'll start to see these things here. So in terms of time, this is the coal chute. This is just a little retained wall area, and coal came down on a horse-drawn railway from Foul Valley coal mines. That was 1860s, and the coal went to Whangarei. This is Mayor's Landing. This was built in 1841. It's the oldest European structure in Whangarei. And it's right on the point where the tides and the fresh and the salt water meet. And of course, everything back here is mostly swamp. Waka used to come up to the floral clock at the farmer's car park. Actually, there's a story of one of the young boys drowning the little stream that came through there. So everything was swamp except for Bank Street, and then going out across to Onoraki, there was a little bit of dry land there. And all the flat land that we live on is mostly on sawdust from the big sawmills that were processing all the trees that came out of the north. Who would have thought? But here you can see, so there's a couple of European things. You can see these little moles sticking out. And they built boat sheds over these. And they had little railway lines, and they could bring boats up. So it was a sort of first sort of marina. people
Is
had.
that Pakeha? Was that
Yes,
Māori?
that was
Pakeha.
and some of the founding European families had boats there, and there's some over here that relate to World War One and stuff. Hereford Pygmere, the famous Pygmere Atlas, he was living in this area, and it was his family that commissioned the first P-class, so like New Zealand yachting. But here you have these remnant Māori gardens. These are stone mounds and one of these long stone roads. But it's just a remnant, because here's the road and here's the road formation as it comes down, covering up what else was there.
So that's all in that bush, eh? That's not the
Yes, it's all in bush. You can walk in here. There's little stairs you can walk down into it. We've had many a field trip there. It's quite exciting having 90-year-olds walking through there and trying desperately not to kill them. But it's a beautiful bush. It's quite mature bush, and because it's mature, it's got a canopy and everything opens up underneath. And you can see all of these. And Whangarei Boys High School have got little barcodes on some of these, because they take their kids there to learn about history, because you can actually have sort of whole history of Whangarei in this one little place, which is kind of cool. But you know, I like this sort of stuff. So
There are a few remnants on the other side as well, on the other side of Pakeha Drive.
not that I know of.
Oh, right.
It's all under city. It's all under houses now. You see.
Yeah, I thought I've seen some stuff.
You might have done.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stone walls around, but
Yeah.
often that relates to the period of time after European farming started. So 3 Mile Bush Road, Austin Road, and things like that. Lovely stone walls, but they're stone walls that were from Māori gardens, but they were probably made in the 1870s, so we have no record of them. But they're surrounded by parasites and kumara pits and things like that, so it's a smoking gun. So you can see all of this. But if you go up to Parihaka, you go up to the viewing platform up there, and then just take a walk along the ridge top, and you'll see kumara pits. Now most kumara pits are, let's say about this long from that wall to me, and maybe this wide. They might be this deep, and you could store enough kumara in there for 8 people, 10 people for the whole season. There is 88 kumara pits Parihaka, and there's at least 150 on the other side in Coronation Reserve under 2 giant parasites. They're all hiding in these giant horseheads. And some of the kumara pits are 2 meters deep. And how big is this room? Food was really important. Good places to grow food was very important, and you had to be able to protect what you had. And so the famous story about the haka on top of Parihaka, which is gets its name from, you know, at that point you're fighting on heartland. You know, this is live and die. And so these are things that are really important. If you go to Auckland, they have volcanoes too, just like Pakeha, but all the gardens are under houses. Auckland Council 1915 protected those for visual reasons. So you've ended up with this wonderful pockets of volcanoes. All of them have been modified with steps. So when we talk about societies before use of metal, we call them Neolithic or New Stone Age, because they use stone, but it's wood and stuff like that. And some of the biggest of those Neolithic sites around the world, you think of in Europe and stuff like that. But we have the biggest ones here. Maunga Kia, One Tree Hill, has been worked out. 500,000 cubic metres of soil have been moved to create those terraces. And that's just one of what was 50 volcanoes in Auckland. There's down to about 38 now.
For defensive purposes
No,
or
living.
for agriculture, horticulture?
For living, for the gardens around them. You don't garden on the actual part, that's your occupation. And defence is to protect what you've got. It's you know, Whangarei has what I call a hidden city. You know, this was, you know, if you actually go up there and take visitors to your lovely place to go and walk along and have a look at these, they're beautifully preserved. Due to the weird nature of the clay up there, they hold their shape. But if it's raining, don't go off the path, because it has 0 coefficient of friction. And you'll be arse over tit before you can say it. I took the University of the Third Age up there once, and we just walked along, you know, and came back. And the guy said, I think I might walk down the hill. And I said, Why is that? He said, well, I just had quadruple bypass surgery last week and I'm not feeling too good. But, you know, the thing about archaeology, as opposed to, say, a building or a ruin of a building, is that you know what a building is. You know what a ruin of a building is. But once you get your eye in on what the archaeology is for things like power sites and kumara pits and stuff like that, and especially people who like gardening type things, they get what I talk about. Farmers get what I'm talking about, because it's actually the same fundamental premise, just different ways of doing it. And so when you go back to that first image of all the land that's changed, these are ecological solutions to allow people to live. So if people, we know people didn't come here before the Polynesians, because there's no ecological evidence of anyone here before 1300. I suppose it's possible somebody did come from maybe the Western Pacific, but they left no impact at all. They didn't burn anything, they didn't leave any artifacts, they didn't leave any sites. And it would be, for them, 5,000 kilometers to come to find this place. And they had no history of doing it. Their history comes this way. So you can track it, and the carbon dates work, and the traditions work, and the languages work. So that's the history of New Zealand. So New Zealand is the last major landmass to be settled by humanity. And people say, well, we just got a short history, it doesn't make it any important. And I say, well, actually it makes it really important. Because if you're interested in how and why people do ecological things to improve where they live, to make it viable, you can go to Australia and talk to traditional owners there, but it's 70,000 years ago. There are no traditions that survive that long. But in New Zealand, we do. We have traditions. We have traditions of voyaging. We have traditions of adaptation. We have traditions of people saying, oh, the kuma died here, so you have to go somewhere to get it. And we talk about push and pull factors. We talk about accidental versus deliberate. People used to argue the Pacific was settled by accident. Yes, I was out fishing and I got blown off course, but luckily I had 900 people on board, a whole bunch of kumara and tara and stuff, we were fine. And by the way, it's against the prevailing wind, but we still did it anyway.
Yeah.
So it's deliberate. Was it because I'm hungry? No, they came through the Pacific so fast, we struggled to get the carbon dates to actually show change over time. This was a land of opportunity. In many ways, it completely paralleled the European arrival to improve yourself. Land of opportunity. And when they got here, they lost all that knowledge about traditions of voyaging beyond some general stuff, because it's very expensive. And we know it's expensive because it survived up in Micronesia. Now, Micronesia is a Polynesian part of the Pacific above Papua New Guinea and those Admiralties and Bismarcks. Tiny little islands, Guam, and all these tiny little places like Pontiac. And we know because a New Zealand doctor called Dr. Lewis sailed up there and made himself known to the local families. And up there, they had continued their voyaging tradition because they have a problem with hurricanes, and they have tiny little atolls, and they need to tie themselves together with boats, and they have a reciprocal arrangement with Guam, the one big island, so they can always get trees and stuff. Because your island can often lose half of itself and a new bit form, so you have to have boats and navigation. So whole 3 families on these 3 islands had maintained the voyaging traditions and knowledge. So they're completely out of the economic cycle. They can't, you know, the rest of the village supports them because they have this knowledge. And it was on the cusp in the 1970s of going, because other things were coming in, making it not necessarily as viable. And so, I don't have the names of the people, but I can get them. It was at the time of the Renaissance of Polynesian culture. And that's when the waka porter started up with the hukulea, fiberglass double hull waka, which sailed from Tahiti to Hawaii. And who was the navigator on board? One of the knowledgeable people on these 3 villages who wanted to keep the knowledge alive. And he knew where it was. He's got star charts and stuff. He knew where everything was. He'd kept all of that knowledge going. And so now we have 15 waka porters sailing through the Pacific, including some from New Zealand. And Sir Heck Busby has learned how to create recreate knowledge. Richard Walton from Professor Adaptation says, we don't really ever lose stuff, you know. It's just we just sort of forget about it. We can always recreate it. If you've ever seen the famous Cutty Sark ship, famous ship in England, sits at Greenwich. It's got the tallest masts of any ship, and it's got like layers of canvas. And what they were doing was they were getting lightweight, valuable crop from China to England, tea. And if they got there first, you were a millionaire. And so these ships used to race every year to get here. We have no idea how they do their rigging. It's completely, you know, so much bigger than any other ship. But if we had to, we could work it out, as you do with, I don't know, America's Cup. You know, we can work it out. So that's the toolkit that humanity's got. It's this ability to use knowledge to actually take what might appear to be a problem and make it into an asset. Unfortunately, we have the ability to do the opposite as well, but that's why New Zealand's important. That's why the story about archaeology in New Zealand can tell you stories about other places, allows you to talk about agency, allows you to talk about how it happened. And we're lucky enough to have traditions that talk about who did it, Kupe and Toi and various others. We think maybe it was a title rather than an individual. It was one of those things. It was successful. There's still names that we still know today. So this talk's been a little bit defocused because I'm trying to squeeze Māori gardening systems into an ecological discussion, but it's relevant. I'm just not doing it particularly well. So thank you very much. Much appreciated.